In today's podcast, I have the pleasure of being joined by Paul Howarth. Paul is a former ex-professional football player, been on live TV, scored big penalties in the FA Cup. He then went down a slippery slope of depression and everything after coming out of playing professional football. He's now subsequently built and scaled a business for millions and millions and millions of pounds. He's now also written a book. He's also a psychotherapist in terms of how to optimize people's thought processes, how they think, how they act, and ultimately how they can become more successful in their lives. In this episode, we're going to talk through identity, mindset, how to catch yourself and improve the way you think every single day so you can catch negative thoughts, and how you can push yourself to perform at the level you want in every area of your life, whether it's your personal life, your business, or your health. Let's get into it. So Paul, first question I want to ask you is, you walked away from professional football then and went into business. How was that as a transition from athlete to kind of entrepreneur business?
At first, quite easy, and then really difficult. And the reason being is, I think the coming out of it, there's this, or I didn't allow myself to feel probably the grief in a way that we're going through. Confused at the time, coming out of it. All I'd ever done was football. It's all I ever knew. So obviously we create identities around that. But it was a case of just flying into the next thing, and I did that, and I took that energy forward. And then it was probably about a year or 2 years, year and a half after that I really started to settle into it. And it was then that I struggled in a way, and it was quite confusion at the time. But yeah, you're learning a new set of, it's a new playing field that you're in, but you can. There's a lot of qualities that you get, obviously, from playing professional sports that you can take into business. And it does open a few doors as well, So it was tricky to start with.
You've spoken openly about kind of going through severe depression. What were kind of like the big triggers of that? Because I think, obviously, if you look statistically, the biggest cause of death of men is suicide, which is horrific. Yeah. And obviously, it doesn't get talked about a lot. What were the things that were pulling you down that kind of rabbit hole of depression?
I felt empty inside. That's how I could describe it, I think. And subsequently, it was my own behaviour that was driving a lot of it. And I think that breakup of football and that loss of identity, I really struggle with. And it's like, shit, who am I now? And I got quite good at masking that. I was still performing the job that I did. I was to be with people and work with people, and I felt like I'd go into a meeting taking one version of Paul in and kind of hang him up on the door, and then pick the old version up on the way out. And it's when you're left with yourself, and you start questioning things. And obviously this is all going on in here. Everybody else is getting on with their own lives. And for me, I managed that with drink. I drank more to self-soothe it. Again, completely unaware at the time. Just did more of it. Got into new groups, new friendship groups. And the more you go into different environments, the more you act like those different environments do. And you're obviously just putting a plaster over what's really going on underneath for you, So there were, I think the last couple of years were horrific is probably the best way to describe it. I was just going through these cycles of binging and getting myself back right, and then going out and doing it again. They're just stuck in this self-sabotaging loop. But weirdly still progressing in other areas of my life. And I think that was one of the tipping points with it, because I was always liked to drink, and I always went out and did that, but I was always getting on. I was always passing exams. I was still moving forward. And then I remember a point, and I think I was studying at the time, and I thought, this is just not going in. I wasn't retaining the information, and I might have failed one of the exams or something like that. And I remember feeling that this is actually holding me back. But then I didn't want to let go of it, because that terrified me as well. And I remember that point being quite a tense period And I think the difficulty sometimes when you've got this, there's a drive in you to get forward, you then try and fight to hold on to it, to beat it. And it's actually the opposite that you need to do and surrender into it. But that's not easy when your natural characters to like solve it and not be beat. Really difficult.
Would you say one of the things, and this is something I'm personally working on, is like detachment from things like that?
Dissociation completely. Because what happens is the way that when you run out of ideas, when you push and push and push and push, the miraculous acts of the body and the mind is it does for you what you can't do for yourself. So it goes, all right, enough, and you dissociate, you detach. You're not choosing to, you at one level you are choosing to do it, but at a cell level, at a cellular level, your body's doing for you what you're not able to do for yourself in that moment. You dissociate. And then that passes for a time, and then that doesn't feel comfortable anymore, and then you take a step back out. So this constant dissociation, going back out, making a bid to do something different, pulling back, this ebb and flow is quite normal in how the body protects itself from doing it, just like you would with any type of wound, any physical wound. You withdraw. So the last few years of that isolation, I found myself, drinking more at home, for example, and not going to things because of how I didn't know how it was going to turn out, saying no to going out to places and stuff, but then isolating myself. So, but still kind of getting on in some ways, but then relationships failing, messing up and everything else that goes with that. And then the bigger the problem comes, I was just using it again to try and solve it in the same way, which sounds like insanity, but I guess that is what addiction is.
Do you think some entrepreneurs almost subconsciously break parts of the business to find problems to solve?
That's a good question. Yeah, to kind of create the. I think there's some value in that, because what happens, what I've come to realize happens, and I've sat across many people, from a therapy perspective, business owners from all walks of life. And what I do know is that whatever you're used to, you recreate the situation because it's familiar, even if it's painful and it's hurting you, and it doesn't get you the results that you probably that are going to benefit your life down the line. So if you've had difficult or chaotic times or uncertain times growing up, then it's quite normal for us to go and set that up and recreate it. And there's no better way to do that than business, because it's unpredictable. So you find a lot of people that get to the top of the game that have got stories of trauma, whether aware of it or not, of the past. Because it's that drive or that constant being on the front foot to keep you aware of it, to keep the chaos, and being strangely comfortable in the chaos because it's familiar, that gets it forward, So I absolutely think that there's there's something in that.
The big route to your own personal recovery was psychotherapy. Do you want to explain to anyone listening what that is?
Yeah, so there's different modalities. Mine particularly was transactional analysis psychotherapy. I didn't particularly know much about that world. I kind of fell into it. When I finally got help, I accepted that I had a problem. I was lucky that the Football Association paid for me to go to Tony Adams' clinic. So I went and did a month down there, came out from there. I did about 3 months and then went back out and had another go at it. And that didn't work very well. But that was it after that. And that we are literally like a decade on now. That was April 10 years ago. It was the last time that I drank. And I was 6 months into that journey of sobriety. I became a member of AA. That had a big part of my life back then. I did that for 2 years. And I would it was just nagging. It was never enough. I wanted to understand more. Because there were many, many people that had come out of football and hadn't gone down the path that I got down. And we see it with some people, don't we? Like Gaza and Tony and people like that. So I was like, well, what is it? There's got to be something behind it, and I that was where it started. I wanted to understand more about the mind. I wanted to understand about more of human behaviour. And it was literally the PFA therapist at the time. He went, well, you know, there's a training institute there. I do some CPD there. They're really good in Manchester. And it just so happened that they did TA psychotherapy. And, you know, TA was developed by a guy called Eric Byrne that was the next guy on in the line from Freud, effectively from psychodynamic theory. And it's a beautiful theory, you know, that covers a lot of the past. The theory is that we create the scripts for ourselves before the age of 7, you know, the beliefs about ourselves, others and the world, and we go out and relive them to confirm the beliefs that we have about ourselves, in a nutshell. So I went on that, you know, it's a 4-year postgrad. I threw everything into that and the recovery side of it. So, you know, I did many hours of therapy over a good number of years, and that, you know, that adapted into different areas of work as well.
With your background, when you speak to business owners and entrepreneurs, what are the biggest patterns you see why they're hitting kind of glass ceilings? Because there's probably a lot of people listening and watching to this who they're frustrated, they've been in the same position for maybe the last 2-3 years. They're working really, really hard. They think they're doing everything, but nothing's changed.
Yeah. Fear. Beliefs and fear. And we all have it. It doesn't matter where you are in the game. You know, I think the people that get to different stages have worked out or found a way to navigate the belief and the fear and found a way through. So it's unavoidable. But at some point, you know, what the brain doesn't know, it automatically puts it in the bucket as dangerous. So therefore, don't do it. So, you know, we're naturally tuned in to assess for danger more than we are for gain. That's scientifically proven. So we're dealing with that, you know, all the time. And, you know, and you can ask yourself, all right, well, what's the alternative? Everyone just doesn't have that and just goes on and do it. And then what would the world be like? So we don't, you know, so there has to be some effort that needs applying to get something in life, for God's sake, you know. So, but I think that the beliefs that we have about ourselves, about other people and about the world are fundamental. I think the spectrum of all the joy that we have and fulfillment and all the suffering that we have, that is the origin of it. It all comes from that. And it's like, right, well, where do they come from? So then we go back into the early life stuff, and it goes back, you know, the first relationships that we have in life, from the male side and from a female side, are from our dad and our mum. And it's this attachment and the beliefs that we have that shape the rest of our life. You know, it shapes the friendship groups, it shapes the environment that we're in. And some of it's quite easy to unpick and understand, you know, the messages that we get, you know, go on and be successful, or don't take too many chances, fair enough. But a lot of it is in the subtle stuff that we're acutely unaware of as well, that you know, is a lifelong thing of learning. So I think a lot of it is centered around that. And it's about trying to push forward and get through it.
How much of that do you think is an identity shift? Because I catch myself in patterns and loops, and I try and pull myself out of them. Yeah. So I don't know, fear loops about like, this could potentially happen, and I'll kind of live on that chaos treadmill that I kind of quite like, because it makes me work harder, run faster, and whatever it might be. So I try and undo those patterns. And this is what I've personally believe, is that type of mindset will get you to a certain level because it creates enough urgency and pain to like do the thing. Yeah. But then say, for example, I mentioned before this, if you're trying to run a big team of people, you can't be run off pain and urgency and on a chaos treadmill, because then you've suddenly got like 30, 40 people who are on a chaos treadmill.
Okay. Yeah. I get it. What is it that scares, what's the fear around people? Managing multiple people.
What I believe I do, and I see others do, is I want to come in and be the hero and solve all the problems.
Because
I think I can do it better than them.
Okay. Well,
but then I'm training in the behavior of that I don't want to them. That you got a problem, then Charlie will solve it.
Yeah.
Which I'm now trying to unwind.
Yeah. I mean, look, what makes you successful and gets you to a point, usually then needs unraveling to get you to the next point, and that's difficult. And fundamental things in there with it's like what happens if Charlie isn't the main man?
I think that's actually, I think what the challenge for me is, you mentioned like being busy all the time. My brain is addicted to the chaos.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's peace, even if everything's right, and my brain's like, something must be wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing going on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And if there is chaos, you're usually better off fixing that chaos than other people. Yeah. And that keeps you stuck in the effectively a situation potentially. I think it's normal. I think that's quite normal. I don't think there's nothing unusual about it. I think, trusting in other people to do the work and do the job, it doesn't mean that it's going to go right all the time, does it? No. And I think that's where culture is important, that we set, and the direction that we give people. And at some point, there's a tipping point, and the path's quite clear on both sides. You either do it and you try it and you trust it and you work through it and commit to it, or you don't and you stay where you are. And it's like, at some point, if that nag's still there in you to go to that next level, it'll probably push you down the first path, and you'll throw everything into that.
It's that expression, when the pain of staying the same is great and the pain of change is when you make a change.
Usually when there's an impasse, so when we're stuck, the two paths that lie ahead of us both come with pain. It's unavoidable. Absolutely unavoidable. And that's why the brain goes into an impasse. And we go in, and if we look at it at a central nervous system perspective, that's like a freeze state. The body's kind of like stuck, and it's like, yeah. And that's a really important bit of it, because that energy is important, because it's that actually pushes it forward. So it's needed. It's not comfortable, but it's needed. But what we have to do is first become aware of the two paths. That's important. And be aware of the pain, and be aware of the perceived pain. Therefore, is fear comes with it, because we want to avoid the pain. And it's like, right, okay, so I've got these two paths. There's pain on both of them, but which path am I going to go down that's going to give me the best future? And that's the path that we have to take. And usually that's the one where we endure the pain to start with, and then it's freedom down the line. And the other path is usually we avoid the pain first. So what do we normally pick more often? Often we choose the path that avoids the pain first, and we stay stuck.
It's the pain you feel today is the pleasure you'll get tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of truth in that.
How common from the people you've worked with, and even maybe your own business experience, obviously selling businesses, do you think self-sabotage is for entrepreneurs and just getting in their own way generally?
It's everything, because if we look at what self-sabotage is, it's a belief system. Those beliefs are created by our interpersonal early relationships, which we then come up against in later life, because we need to do business with other people. So we're constantly like in that arena with it. So at times we're going to make decisions that, we're going to look at and we're going to think, that's held me back there, or it's stopping me getting forward. If we think of it like this, when we all got up this morning, hopefully we all picked the toothbrush up and brushed our teeth, right? Now, you knew what to do. Your body and your brain knew what to do. You picked it up, you put the toothbrush in, you put it in your mouth, you brushed it, and you brushed it for a certain amount of time, you give you clean teeth, you put it back and got on with your day, yeah? Now, that was a coded neurological pattern in the brain that you learned when you were 1, 2. Someone would give you a toothbrush, you'd have watched someone else do it, they'd have probably told you if you don't brush your teeth, your teeth are going to fall out, all this different stuff come in it. And it's a good example of what the brain does. It codes, so we don't have to work out what to do down the line. We need our teeth to eat food and survive. It's exactly the same with beliefs and our relationships, how we relate to other people. So if you come up with a situation in life that you have already decided is is going to cause you pain and fear, then you're going to do everything to avoid it. So it's very common that we restrict ourselves in the future because the three fears that we have mainly, if we look at the self-belief, the three fears, I call it the TLC framework, so threat, lack, and chaos. So the first belief is that if I'm seen, I'm going to get laughed at. Yeah, so public annihilation, shame. That's the first death that we're trying to get away from. The second one is lack. I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And the third one is the chaotic self, which is I'm broken. There's no hope, it's hopeless, I'm broken. And pretty much those three things run everything if we really dig down into it. And it's those loops, every time there's a push that comes up against it, there's one of those usually at play that's coming up. So we have to understand it, we have to become aware of it, we have to understand that at some point in our life it kept us safe. It's not there because we are, doing it wrong. It's because the very early versions of ourselves, when we had less resources growing up, as we do now as adults, we did it to keep ourselves safe. It protected the younger version of ourselves. But we get to an adult age and it no longer serves us, and we have to work through it and then go again, and then something else comes and we have to work through it and go again. So that's, neurologically, then when you do something different and it turns out that it weren't as bad as you thought it were going to be, the brain kind of updates itself. It's like, all right, we're not dead, we're still going. And you go, all right, okay. So that's important to recognize. And the brain is, the last 20, 30 years of the neuroscience and the research that's coming out, it is quite evidently now no longer just a piece, computer that kind of, the neuroplasticity, but it updates itself. It changes. The more environments change, the more the neurological pathways open up and change. And that's, fascinating and also quite empowering. And we are sat here today, that chair that you're sat on and I'm sat on, it all started as a mental creation.
Someone's idea.
Someone had an idea. Our parents decided to, may or may not decided, but it was a thought that started it, that then started the creation. I mean, we're living in probably the biggest example in the last 30 years of what a mental creation can do. Was sat in a villa in the middle of the bloody sea.
Yeah, we're 2 miles out at sea.
It's crazy. So if you think of that and you think, wow, is it really true that we create our own suffering, and we are creating our own reality?
Are you a big believer in Joe Dispenza's work?
Yeah.
So like
loads of it, but I've read one of his books, and
one of his sayings, like, it's your personal reality will create your personal reality. So like your surroundings, your environment, the things you see. And I think even I would say me moving to Dubai 4 years ago made a big difference in terms of like the thoughts I'd have every day, the things I'd see, and more things maybe pushing me up than kind of pulling me down. You mentioned there something very interesting in terms of the brain can learn new pathways. With that being said, then, do you think it's important that people almost have that saying of like, fuck your mood, follow the plan, just do the thing that you need to do? Because when you come out the other side, your brain will be like, oh, that wasn't that hard, I done it anyway. And it'll kind of like rewire itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And what path this took me down with the actual growth equation, which I'll come on to, because it was the same thing. It annoyed me. I wanted to understand why that worked. It wasn't enough to, keep pushing forward, and at the end of it, it's like, okay, that's fine, that's a concept, but I want to know why. And I totally agree with you about the environment. I mean, on Sunday when we did the walk with the men's group, the backtrack, and there's a small mound. It's probably 250 meters, and there's a short climb. But because we're quite high up, you don't have to walk that far, and all of a sudden you stood on top of this hill and you're just looking down, and the peace levels and the whole, it's different. It's just different. And just that slight change in where you are, all of a sudden the perspective changes. And when we think of what happens with the brain and these pathways that we create, it's in effect like, you know, if you had an open field and you wanted to walk to the connecting field and you set off walking, there were no gates or anything, it was just a new field. You followed one, you know, get through here and get through here. And the next time you wanted to walk it, you're not going to walk down a different path. You're going to follow that one because you've already gone down it. And then you walk and walk and walk. And then all of a sudden there's no grass keeps growing there because it's just ground and there's just a path. And that's what the brain's like, these neurological pathways. But if you decided that you wanted to walk in a different across the field to a different corner, you could walk in a different, and that's what the brain's like. It illuminates and it opens up new pathways. But I was sat in the therapy room one day, and I had a board that I could write on, and I keep seeing all these things about growth, and I've been doing a lot of work with nature and looking at the universe and the interconnectivity, everything. I've been reading about trees, and I've been reading about the connection and underneath with trees and how the fungi communicate in the forest and pass all the information. And if one tree's dying over there, they can actually pass nutrients across. It's like fascinating. I'm thinking, okay, now, well, okay, so there's a fractal nature to the universe. So if that works there, then that works in it. And we see that, the connectivity of how we work and everything.
High frequency people.
Yeah, you know, and just the movement of things. It's the same with bees. It's the same with everything. It's every there's an interconnectivity that formulates everything. So I looked over and I said, there's this plant in the corner. So like that plant there. And I thought, right, if I can work out what makes this plant grow, I might be onto something here. So I thought, right, what makes a plant grow? So obviously straight away comes to me, you know, sunlight, water, you know, the nutrients. Maybe I might walk over and give it a bit of water now and again and put some care into it. And I thought, well, that's not just it. It can't just be it. You know, there's other components that work out to this. So if that plant was in a greenhouse or it was in a box, it would never be able to grow past the ceiling that it's at. So it therefore requires the space to move into. Yeah. So the first bit of it is the energy input, the light and the water. And then the second bit is the space. So for anything to grow, it needs an input. So it brings in the water and the sunlight, and through the process of photosynthesis, it puts the output. It pulls in the carbon dioxide and puts out the oxygen that we breathe. So there's this input and output exchange, which formulates everything in life. And then there's a space that's required for it to grow into. And then you think, okay, well, is that it? And it's like, well, at different points in it, there's also time has its impact on it. Because if I'd looked at the plant 3 weeks ago, it'd have been different to what it were now. And when it was a seed, it was just a seed. So the energy input times by the space and divided by the time effectively creates the growth of the plant that we can see. And I was like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. So I started doing it with clients and I started writing it out. And what happens a lot is, go back to what you said previously. It's like, right, there's a problem there. Bang, 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 bang. You know, we hear like burnout and things like that. And unless the space is getting created for something for it to gestate into, you can't run on that energy forever. You know, someone once said a supercar needs super brakes, and it's so true. It's the same. There's two sides of the very same coin. And in the world that we live in now, you know, full throttle down to the floor, you know, is only going to end in one way. And let's be honest, sat on top of a mountain meditating all day is probably not going to get you forward anyway. Excuse me. So we've got to find this harmony towards these two energies that we have in us, that I'm going, and then this spiritual side to us that needs that yearn, that slowing down. Before we created the identity of the business, before we created Paul Howarth the footballer, Paul Howarth the psychotherapist, Paul Howarth the farmer, Paul Howarth, you know, who are you underneath it? You know, and I think going forward now, this is the age that we're going into. And I think the more that we soften into that authentic self, the becoming of the authentic self, I think the better businesses will be, the more production we'll have. Sorry.
Sorry.
What? And I think the last decade of, forming the identities and getting forward, I think we're becoming more aware of this, the emerging self. Because when you start breaking the beliefs down, which can be quite scary for some people, because it's like, well, you're kind of facing yourself. That part of you then grows that might have not been able to grow in the past because you had to push, you had to do all the other stuff, because you had to become something that you thought the world wanted you to be.
So you're trying to live up to promises that for other people almost.
Yeah, it happens a lot. And we have to remember that, our parents and caregivers do the best with what they've been given and been passed down from the generation that they've had. And I'm a flawed parent as well. My children will have things to work through as they go forward. And I hope that I bring them up to understand that, they're not on this planet to meet my needs. They have to go and find their own way. My job is to put the support network around them and give them what they can and know that I'm there for them when required. But I've got my own life task to complete, and they need to find their own life task to complete. And I think that's one of the healthiest ways that we can bring our kids up, which is really difficult when we see them hurt or in pain, or we want to take care of them, and depending on what age they are. So we have to remember that, there's there might be a necessary process at the start, which towards caregivers or parents, where anger has to be there because it needs to be worked towards. But we have to understand that people do the best usually with what they've been given, and there's a choice. You either want to learn about it and understand it, or you don't, and you put it all down to bollocks and get on with what you're doing, and both are fine. We're all different.
What would you say were the biggest personal patterns you had to break to lead to like the business success you've had in terms of like exiting businesses and things like that?
Wow, that's a good question.
Because that's a lot of growth in that period of time.
It is, and it's funny because I was thinking about this. in the last couple of days, and the real polarity with this is a lot of the times you never really know until you've got on the other side of it, and that might be a real think like, give me the magic bullet. But the learning doesn't come till after. And I think very early on, we were talking then about your scaling systems and that raw energy that you've got early on. Have you really got time to think about it, and all that? Probably not. You've just got to put your foot down. You've got to go. And you have got to go. It's maximum input. That dictates the outcome. And if you're in that energy and you've got that about you, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get forward. It might be messy. It will be messy. But a lot of the times you'll learn it. But again, it comes back to the space thing. Where's the time for reflection to put back into it? One of the biggest things with me, and I kept self-sabotaging in my behaviour, in many different ways. I knew I had ability. I knew I had skill to get forward. There was something I'd do, and I think, God, I could have been there now, or I could have been there. But then I seemed to pick myself up, and like when my back was against the wall, or I felt like I was on my knees, it was like that bounce back was, and I got in that pattern that become quite addictive. Like, fuck it up, bounce, and there's probably some ego in that, like, because I'd overcome something. But I was hurting myself and other people in the process, and I was obviously unaware of this. But one of the biggest things was I wasn't scared of failing. I was actually scared of success. And that was one of the biggest things that it was like in a way, wanted to stay relatively small, not be seen. And it's like, all right, well, why? What is that about? And I think being on a pedestal in a way early on is quite a lonely place, and living up to expectations or perceived expectations. So if you don't get to those points, if you don't then, you can't then let people down. So stay away from the success. But then there's this other part of you that wants to succeed. And this is where this
conflict,
and where the drama comes from. Because you don't want to sit without it and you don't want to sit with it.
And is that why you think you maybe yo-yoed up and down? And that's why, because I see this all the time with entrepreneurs. And the biggest thing I see with people who we coach and help with their businesses, whenever their business isn't doing well, it's a personal issue. And normally that personal issue is some type of self-inflicted issue from some type of poor decision they've made.
100%. The whole of suffering in life comes from interpersonal relationships. And the first one of those is the relationship with yourself. And the decisions and the behaviour that you make are based on those. And we talk about, everybody's different. You'll get very successful people that love KPIs and track, and you'll get people that have never looked at a balance sheet in their life. So there's no which I'm personally not a KPI man. What I do know is that the bottom line of your business is directly linked to your belief system. I know that. And I'm not sat here saying that I've got this wonderful belief system. I struggle, because I want to get forward. I want to get forward. And as soon as I'm going into new territories, the brain does what it does. And it's like, whoa, let's throw this in there. And, all these, like you were saying, all these things come up, what could go wrong. Because the neurological pattern in the brain, going back to the brushing the teeth, once we're triggered with it, the brain responds at 1/50th of a second. Excuse me. 1/50th of a second. That's how quick it responds. So it's pointless trying to think, I'm never going to have these beliefs again. Because you can't outrun that. Even you can't outrun that with your pace. Yeah? So it's like, well, what then? Well, the body knows. So the brain might go at 1/50th of a second, but you haven't yet acted on it. But if you're not connected in here, the behaviour comes from the mind. But let's say something's going on for me and I'm like worried about something and I'm all in here. If I start moving into here and I can feel it in my chest, I can feel it in here, then the brain, all right, well, this is where we are. This is going on for me. And then from there, you can maybe make different decisions or different choices, becoming aware that you're in this, what I call the identity, the IDM. And it's that shift from that into the I am, which is the newer version, that's the bridge. And it's the body that holds the bridge.
Now, I'm not going to sound like Stephen Bartlett, but I know a lot of people coming onto our podcast and who are not subscribing but still enjoying the content. If I have one small ask for you, it's please hit the subscribe button. It'll help us a lot. Do you have a system or a process to identify what is the thing that's kind of holding you back? Because I think obviously what I see the most successful people is they're generally very self-aware. And I found, particularly like the last 2-3 years, I've become much more self-aware of catching my thoughts and then how I can manage that and try and manipulate it back to the frame I want.
I think that there's a couple of things. The TLC framework's good for that because it's like threat, lack, or chaos. And it's like, all right, but before you can get to that, you've got to get aware of like it going on and catching it. And that's where, so I use something called space, which is sense, S for sense. So, all right, so you can feel it in your body. So there's something's going on here and it's the body that's feeling it. Then you've got to stop. You've got to pause. And you've just got to give yourself that space, that break. And that might be with the breath. It might be a walk around, do a lap of the park, whatever. But you've got to pause. And then you've got to ask yourself, where's this coming from? Which one is it serving, the TLC? I'm in the identity here. It's, I hear it a lot, but it's like, we've got to stop thinking that it's a bad thing. It's really not. You need both of them because that's the bit that's pushing you forward in a way. And it's there for good reason. It's there to protect. So once you've asked which bits it's coming from, we then get to choose, which is the choice. We then get to choose the next step, what we do. And then the E is the embody. We've got to then bring it back to the body and feel it. Yeah. So that's the space framework. And it might be that you do that after the event, as weirdly as that sounds. It's like, shit, that happened. And I made that. But you catch it early. And then you can go back and think, right, what was that? What was that? What was that? Sorry, bloody throat. Terrible. So that in itself can be really useful to be able to break it down. And then from there, which is a framework that I use with the actual growth equation that we talked through before, I have a page that we draw it out on. So we look at the outcome that you want. So let's say that it's a coach that wants to sell more courses. Like, that's the outcome. All right, I want 250 grand worth of income this year. So straight away, that big goal, and I think it's important to have these, loosely throw these things out there, but not get too bogged down with the outcome. I think that's really important. I mean, there's great books out there, The Power of Why and all that. You can spend so much time trying to dig into why things are important to you. But loosely a goal, a big goal. Right, I want $1 billion AUM, throwing that up there. But that's going to feel quite big, and it's going to scare some people. Yeah? So what you've then got to do is go back to the inputs. And you've got to look at the inputs, like the light, like the soil, like the nutrients, like the water that you're going to pour on it, and maybe the cutting back some leaves, and all this stuff goes into the growth of the plant. So you've got to draw up a list of inputs that are directly correlated to that outcome. Nothing else. And this is where we get really focused on how we're spending our time. And it might be as simple as, all right, let's say I'm camera shy and I don't want to do any work online. You don't have to jump straight to putting a post out with the camera. You might order the microphone from Amazon. You might set it up in the room. You might record one and send it to someone that you trust. You might record 10 and just look at it yourself. You haven't put anything out yet. But these little inputs, what they do every time you make an input towards it, the brain starts to then focus. It starts to become normality. So you don't have to go to this massive thing straight away. But as long as you're making dedicated inputs towards that outcome, you're on the right path. And it can stop that freeze. It can stop that impasse. Even when it feels really hard, you can feel it in the body. It's like, fuck, I do not want to do this. All right, well, what thing can you do that feels palatable? But it's making that. You might message someone and say, I'm struggling with my social media. Would you mind just giving us 10 minutes? Do you know what I mean? Like, they're all dedicated little inputs that go into the growth and meeting the output. And then you've got to look at the space and think, right, what space am I creating for this to happen? Maybe because you're avoiding that, you're spending time on tasks that don't relate to it. Maybe you're getting pulled into drama from other people. You think, I've just dealt with a lot of family drama over Christmas. That. So maybe you start saying no to things. Maybe you go and learn about it. But unless you're creating space for that to happen, it's not going to work out. And then the time part of it is anything that goes really in the diary from there has to be one of those inputs, or it has to be something off the 7 Hungers framework, which I'll come to in a minute. And really that bit of putting that out there, and you might have different outcomes for different things that you're doing. It might be work, it might be a relationship, it might be that you're a father and what that looks like. So it's a really good tool and framework to be able to use. Say, all right, what do I want? What am I working towards? Don't get too obsessed with that outcome. Have it there. Have it as a pointer in the future. Because the reality is, it never really ever works out how you expect it to. I never, was expecting to sell my business at the time. In my head, it was probably going to be in 20 years down the line. But every decision I made, every little moment accumulated to that result. And when it came, I was in the game because I'd given myself the opportunity by all those decisions that I'd made over the previous 7 years. And I could go back way before then. That winning penalty I scored on Sky against Bournemouth in the FA Cup was a 30-second snippet. But I had years. The 4 clubs rejected me before I went to Shrewsbury. you know, the training, the rejection, the laughs, all that went on. You know, my mum and dad taking me to football training 7 times a week when I was a kid. They all built up to that one moment. So that it's always an accumulation of small moments that at some point accumulate in what we then class as a win. And that's so important, to never underestimate that. Now, however small it might seem at the time, you keep dripping things in towards it, it will naturally start to manifest and change.
So there's a couple of things you said there I'll unpack. Something I'm a massive believer in is micro urgency, macro patience.
Okay.
So it's like, cool. Whatever it is, you need to do it now as quickly as possible. Yeah. But in the long run, you need to be very patient, because my mental framework and goals has changed a lot in terms of, okay, I have to make this much this year, do this much.
Yeah.
Whereas I now will think, okay, I want to make this much. I'm trying to reverse engineer back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say you have an online business. How many sales calls do I need to book every single month? Then that would be our leading indicator that I'm then going to be, okay, that's the only thing I need to focus on.
Yes.
Providing other metrics. And then the outcome will come if we can do that. Absolutely.
Because you trust your process. You know that you've got the ability and skill to do it. And that's only become possible because of the years before when you didn't know whether you had the skill, because you were not shooting in the dark, but you can believe in yourself, but until someone pays for it,
are we delusionally optimistic?
Yeah. You know, so that makes sense that's shifted. It's like, right, well, the brain's like, right, now we've got the evidence that this works. So all I need to do now is manage this input bit. And of course, things will change and trends will change. So there will be inputs that you'll be making that you'll probably be doing, we do naturally. And we look like at trends, what's going on, right? The marketing side of it, what's working now, what's someone else doing, what research are we putting into what other people are doing and how things are moving. All those are inputs into the future outcome that you're looking at doing. You know, the learning that you're doing, the additional stuff into leadership and all that are the inputs. We do it subconsciously. Do it very well subconsciously, but when you become aware of why it works, and I link it back every single time to nature, this is a blueprint for growth.
The most interesting thing you said about the nature analogy is the space.
Yeah.
Because something else, this is being filmed in start of January, a lot of people will set big goals for this year, all this extra stuff they want to do. So they want to add more stuff on their plate, but you can't add more stuff on your plate till you've taken stuff off of your plate.
Absolutely.
You can't do everything.
Absolutely.
Like you couldn't be a professional football player and then run your business at the same time.
No, you're absolutely right. You know, and some of the leaves have to go, and that process can be quite difficult. Again, based on our beliefs about relationships and stuff. But unless we're creating the space, I mean, you know, on the farm you've got fences there, right? You know, and you know, you get a horse, for example, that will respect the fence. I mean, it knows where it is. It's been trained how it is. If someone walks up the track with some feed and the pigs are in that field, they don't give a shit about the electric fence. They're through it. They don't give a shit if they're zapped. They're just through it, or they'll tunnel under it and they're over there. So their desire for food is much greater. The fear's gone because of the desire what's over there, you know. And they'd be similar for the cows or the sheep or whatever. So these electric fences, these boundaries. You know, if you're thinking of an invisible circle around you of space, but where does it end? So you've got your physical space, but then you've got your mental space. And if you look at a tree, how it grows, you know, take the redwood, that, like, you know, biggest tree in the world. Interestingly, it doesn't. You'd think it'd grow like that physically, but when it's that big, if you made a mark on the tree there and it grew 100 years and it grew another 100 feet, that mark would still be in the same place at the base of it. The base doesn't grow, it grows from the top, from the canopy. So it's like, what's the mental expansion that we've got? And there is no physical limitation on that. So that boundary, that invisible boundary that we've allowed ourselves to put in place, which is safe for where we see it at that time, is there. But we think that's it. We allow the brain to, but it isn't. It's just an invisible boundary. Have you heard the one about the fleas in the box jumping, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you know, there's loads of fables like that.
It's like the baby elephant with the little chain.
Baby elephant with the chain. You know, the electric fences, Pablo's dog. You know, the collar that round the dog. You know, zap the electric, and they use them now in farms. You know, electric collars around cattle, so there's no fences there. But as soon as they get to the boundary, it goes off, and they're like, oh, shit, you know, go back over there. So we have to ask ourselves, who put the boundaries there? These limitations that are there for good reason, protection, and they once would have protected us. And let's go deeper into that, because this is important. So I'll give you an example, and I'll change, you know, obviously, names and places and all that. I had a client once who specifically remembers coming to therapy with, you know, it's like third 18-month relationship, doing well at work, struggling in personal life, you know, kind of an acceptance, this is the way it's going to be. So we start going through that. Anyway, one memory he has is going to give his dad a kiss at night. And his dad pushing him out of the way and saying, fuck off, watching the TV, right? So, as a child, one thing that you can't do is make the parent bad, because they're the ones putting the food on the table. So you can't sit there and go, hold on a minute, you know, I've got needs here. The parent has to, until you get to the certain ages of 13, 14, 15, and you start becoming more aware, they're on the pedestal, because that's nature. There's a hierarchy. They're putting a roof over my head, they're putting food on the table. The parent cannot be bad. But I've got all this negative feeling inside me, so what do I do with it? Well, I introject it back on myself, because it's got to go somewhere. So one of the biggest fears we hold, there's the three main areas that we're trying, so there's the fears, but it's like, what are we trying to get away from? One is shame, public annihilation. One is abandonment, we're going to be chucked out of the group, and the other one is hopelessness. There's just literally no hope. There's the three things that we're trying to avoid, as opposed to a physical death. So now he's got this natural impulse to want to love and connect, but he can't get it. But he fears abandonment or rejection. So he tells himself that he's the problem. He's not worthy of love. And that wonderfully stops him going to get the next kiss. It keeps him safe. It stops him getting pushed away by his dad. And that works. That decision at that moment in time was right, because if he kept going and kept getting pushed away, the brain for a child is like, I'm abandoned. It's death. So he adapted very well. But here he is now, and filled that with doing well and getting praised by working hard and all that different stuff. Yeah. The more I'm achieving, we see this a lot, particularly with men, the achievement, that's why this emptiness, the fulfillment, because there's never enough. You never stop to go, fucking well done. Because it's like, no, next mountain, next mountain, next mountain.
Hedonic treadmill.
Yeah. Because the fulfillment's not the goal. The goal is the recognition, the external validation. Because if I've not got that, then who the fuck am I? So, in a relationship, he's now got this belief that I'm unlovable, deep down. Part of him wants the relationship, another part of him doesn't want to get abandoned. And that's where the impasse comes in. So this is where, you know, when I say we create beliefs and we hear it so much, they're outdated. All right, great, they're outdated. That doesn't really help me in the here and now. It's an outdated belief. Like, what is the depth of it? And this is where they come from. And I always use the example of like the wayfinders. I don't know why it comes back to me that of old, you know, they didn't have maps. They just navigated off the patterns in the sky and the past stories passed down. And I think we can't get stuck in the past. It doesn't serve us, but we can use it as guides. We don't want to sit there for 24-hour days trying to remunerate over things. That's not going to work. But in those space if we can piece together, connect the dots, this is why, maybe that's why, and become curious about how we've constructed the belief about ourselves, just like we've been saying about the mental creation of the universe. Our identities have been mentally created to keep us safe so that we fit into the group. So once you start to understand that, when these problems come up, when these ceilings get hit, we then get into a place of like, right, well, what's important and where do I get on from here? And that one thing that happened only last week, and it really brought it home for me. The business we bought last year wasn't a massive business, but it had all the regulatory licenses that we need. So it was valuable in that sense. And the guy had sadly passed away. And it was his son dealing with it and his widow. And they were very happy to, let it pass on and let it go on. And I remember last year going to meet her, and she opened the car and she literally gave me nothing was on computers. It was like proper old school. And I got all these files and I'm like, come on, I'm thinking, okay, that's a bit weird, but there's a sense of responsibility in this and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you go through it, which is quite normal. You cut back. So you go, right, 70% of it, don't need that, but I better keep hold of this stuff. So anyway, a year passes and this stuff's just sat in the folds and not come out. And then we've been sorting some of the space out back at home. So I get these files back out. And I'm sat looking at these files, and some of them go back to like 1970. And I'm like, wow, this is the guy's life work. And now I'm sat here with them in my hands. And do you know what? I've no doubt that at some point in his life, he would have been held back by what he thought I thought of him. And he never fucking met me. It's like, oh, shit, what are they going to think? We get so caught up in not doing because of what we think people are going to think of us. And I don't know what, he will have his own files and personal stuff at home and what that's like now going forward, 12 months on. But what really hit me, and I'm like, I need the space. I haven't got the room for so that, I'd have no use for them. So they went on the burner, and it really brings me back to it. It's like, well, what is there really to worry about? Of course, we've got worry, and naturally we need that so that it helps us navigate the decisions that we make. But when I get stuck in my mind and questioning things, I go back to those questions. Am I putting effort in? Is my effort high enough? Because if it's not, then there's something that I can control there. I can go and put more effort in. And if it is really high, then I'm trying. And that's also all right. And longer term, what is it really all about? Because he won't be remembered for the PI quotes that he got on file or he just won't. He'll be remembered for who he were, how he made people feel, what he did. So it really comes back to like, what is the nature of business? What's the end? What's the game with it? And I think that changes as we develop and we change and we grow. It's a different energy that you're in when you're starting out to it is when you get into the middle bit and you get into the upper bit. And having that witnessing of yourself is so important. Like what's going on here, questioning it, not tying yourself in knots, but like just looking at it from that perspective.
Do you have a process you use on like a daily, a weekly, monthly basis to kind of analyze things like that?
Not rigidly. It's just something that comes into the psyche. And again, it comes back to the space thing. Because if you constantly got your foot down to the floor, you're constantly in that fight, flight, get forward, which we need. But that blocks it because the body's doing cortisol and adrenaline. It's going to that, what's it needing? It's survival, it's drive. And I don't mean that in any negative way. It's just like we need that raw energy to get forward. And it's only when the space comes in, and that might be, walking down the track or walking around the block. It doesn't have to be like a weekend away in Brazil. It can be a really simple moment, leaving the phone, going for a walk. It's then when the things are allowed to come and manifest and things. You need that time for self-reflection. That was one of the big things that we had on the day. It was just that like time that people actually got to come together.
How important do you think it is people detach from their phones and technology? I was listening to a podcast with Pavel, the guy owner of Telegram, who doesn't even own a phone, basically. He just has a phone to check his own app. Because we're in a world now, we've got more technology, more information, and everything to make it easier for us to be successful, yet we're more distracted than ever before.
We see this a lot. I think it's a wonderful marketing tool at the minute to say don't use your phones and all this different stuff, because it's against what everyone else is doing. And I think every individual needs to find their own way with it. If you find yourself in a place of they're doing this and should I be doing this, someone once said to me, look, forget the alcoholic thing. If drink's causing you a problem, then it is a problem. And I was like, that's stuck with me. And it's the same with the phones. If it's causing you a problem, go back to the inputs.
It's fair.
So I actually like sitting in bed sometimes and scrolling through for 10 minutes, watching some of your videos. It's great. I'm joking. But, if I'm watching like someone how to bake a cake or something for 10 minutes, then that's probably not like a directed input to what I'm getting. So you've got to find your own way. That's important. And it comes onto the Hungers framework, which we'll talk about. But what's working for you today also might not be working for you next week. So if you find yourself on your phone at night and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden you're like, this is knocking onto my sleep, well, stop doing it and do something else and change your routine. But then there might be other times when it's actually allowing you in a way to just settle down or, not detach fully, because that's what social media does. You're detaching, but you're not fully dissociated, and that's why it's so addictive. But is it a bad thing? At the end of the day, all our business is on there. Do we need time off it? Yes, of course. But it's got to be for the individuals to decide what works and what doesn't work. That's really important. There isn't a rule book on it. I know that much. Because also it's like kids and things with iPads, and you've got to look at it in the full spectrum. If they've got a lot of outdoor activities and they're doing other stuff like football and, just football, but anything that relates to outdoor physical activity, you can't compare the kid that has 3 hours screen time that does all that to someone that does 1 hour screen time and doesn't do any physical activity. It's just not the same. So again, it all comes down to this, this harmony that we have to think about. And we know what's right. This is the big thing with it. And it's the same with business. We know what's right. I truly believe that everybody, every individual, every entrepreneur has the wisdom in them to make it work for them. I 100% believe that. Wherever it's pulled from for them, I don't think we'll ever know that answer. But I truly believe that the answers are within. And it's up to the individual to become their own best coach, to work things out. And that might mean that you need help at other times from people that are doing it in that world, and they have been there before and they have done it before. I started out getting paid £5 per lead. I drove to Manchester for every appointment that I booked. £5. It cost me more in fuel. But I didn't give a shit because I was learning. And one night at 8 o'clock, there was a knock on the door, and the guy, I thought I was alone in the office, and it was the guy who owned the practice, and he come in, he said, I can hear you through the wall. I was fucking mortified. Half of the reason why we're doing it at night was because I didn't want anyone to hear me. I was on the phone, and I was like, oh yeah, no, it's... And he took me under his wing, and he took me out to his meetings. And I learned more off him, in that 6 months of going out to meetings with him than I could have ever read in any textbook, sat in any classroom. 100%. But I did that. I decided it felt right to do it. And I think for anyone out there that's starting out, go and get a mentor, go and find someone, go and ask someone, because it's natural. And if someone comes up to you as a young kid and they go, Charlie, will you help me? Fucking right, will you? Because we want to do it. We want to pass it on. We want people to get on.
Well, it'll be the same thing for you, because this is the I wouldn't use the word weight. I would say responsibility. I feel I carry is that a lot of people have helped me, so now I feel I need to pay that back.
Yeah,
to the people who helped me.
Absolutely. I have it now. I mean, I came out of AA. I was 2 years in, and this is a similar pattern for me, and I think it's part of the identities that we have and create. And I've had it with psychotherapy. I haven't done any individual work for a couple of years, and at some point I can only speak for myself. I feel a restrictive side of it, and I've kind of got to break out of that bit and go again into something else. And that's just me. But that changing of that identity and that shift for me feels like an ongoing process. And if someone rings me nowadays, I'll say, look, I'll take you to a meeting, because if no one, I remember ringing that number and someone was in my living room that night at 8 o'clock. I was like, what the fuck? This is a bit weird. Spoke to anyone for 2 years. But that hope, that faith that is there, and connection is everything for us humans. I mean, it's quite commonly known that, but connection's not the issue. It's what stops us from getting the connection that's the issue. And that all stems back to the beliefs that we have about ourselves, about other people, whether they're trustworthy or not, whether they're going to do us over, whether there's room at the top for more than one of us. And belief about the world, is it dangerous? Is it full of potential? Is it abundant? Is the danger around every corner? One of the big things that really struck me a few years ago, we were only a couple of years in, and we were in it was a live therapy piece with a very experienced therapist and someone that had volunteered. It wasn't a role play, it was, it was content. And it ended up going a bit deeper than I think it expected to. And, it was brought forward about some sexual abuse that had come out. And at the end of it, she went round and said, right, everybody have their input about what was going on for them as they watched it. And let's say there's 12 of us there, right? 6 people were like devastated, crying, felt really sorry for her. 3-4 people, the majority of the rest of the people were angry at the perpetrator. I felt in like a dissociated kind of analytical place, well, this with that with that, and trying to problem solve. And one person was actually pissed off and angry for crying. And it was like, wow, we've all just seen the same thing, but everybody's had a different perspective and a different experience based on all their experience that have gone on in the past. And that was something that really shifted it for me, because is there ever really a right or wrong? Or have we just got different views and opinions? And I think Robert Grant uses a great example of the diamond, and he calls them the facets, the fact. And every side of that diamond makes up the diamond, and they all shine and shimmer in different ways. But without all the different facets of the diamond wouldn't exist. And it's the same for us with our views. So what's right or wrong, we can all, get caught up in that. But I think taking things as they are, understanding that, people bring to the table what they believe to be true based on what's gone in the past. And genuinely, you could sit down with anyone for half an hour and listen to the story, and it would make total sense as to why they act the way they do and the decisions that they made. So I guess that leads us to a place of, compassion and things like that, and acceptance. But we are all doing our best to make sense of things and getting forward. And I think we have to remember that sometimes.
You had another framework you wanted to share?
Yeah. So the 7 hungers is it's been a critical bit over previous years. And this started as it started from Mary Bird's theory. There was 3 to start with: stimulation, recognition, structure. And what it basically starts out with, and it's been added to as I've gone through over the years, but these hungers that we have, so we get in the Western world now, we get our need for food and shelter met quite easily, but we have other needs that need fulfillment. And when we was coming to the end of the training one day, the therapist said, I'm not sure about AA because you're just kind of replacing one drug with another, one addiction with another. And I was like, and I walked out and I was devastated. I was like, put her on a pedestal. And this thing that I'd spent a year that worked for me, it was getting questioned, and it made me really think about it. And I'm like, well, all right, well, why does it? There's got to be a reason why it works. Why does it work? And I rang the guy who was sponsoring at the time, and I'm like, he said, look, it just does. You don't have to try and work everything out. It just does. And that was never enough. So I'm like, right, I've got to understand more about this. Like, why is it working? And I really sat there and I thought, do you know what? As you look at the decisions that we make, so if I just talk through the hungers, we've got stimulation, which as we're talking now, the cells in the body, the fire. We do that through the way we talk, we do that through the activities that we get, but the cellular nature of the body is constantly firing through its electromagnetic charge. We've got our hunger for security, to feel safe and validated. We've got the hunger for recognition, which like whether we see that on the external level or we hold doors for strangers, we want to fit into the wider group. We've got the hunger for connection, the need to feel in connection with humanity and others and ourselves. And then we've got the hunger for meaning, i.e. what we were just talking about. Every situation that comes up, we give meaning to the situation and the meaning that we have about the path that we're on. And we have the hunger, the natural desire, just like we've talked about with the plant, to grow. It's naturally in us to get forward, to move, to learn, or to grow forward. So these 7 hungers make up the framework. And what became really apparent to me is that if we're not serving them healthily, we will choose unhealthy ways of serving them over none, because none is death. So I'll give you an example of someone throwing a brick through a window as a kid. It's not a very successful strategy, but it's feeding the recognition hunger. You might be part of a gang. It's feeding the connection hunger. And then you look at all the activities that we do and all the addictive things that we have, like alcohol, drugs, sex, work, social media, shopping. They tick every single hunger. And that's why they're addictive. So if I put the two spectrums next to each other and said, right, you've got, alcoholism, which ticks every hunger, but then I look at AA, well, that ticks every hunger as well. Because there's structure, the same times every week, there's 300 meetings, there's stimulation, there's connection, there's recognition. I've done 3 days, 3 months, There's growth, there's new meaning. If you sit in a pub with a group of 10 people and sit in AA with a group of 10 people, it comes back to the environment. But it's well, why does it work? We talk about environment change. Well, why? Well, that's one of the fundamental reasons why. So I remember about 5 years ago thinking, wow, right, well, do you know what I'm going to do for the next 2 weeks? I'm just going to get rid of all the business stuff out of my diary. I'll still do it. I'll still do some, but I'm not going to plan. And I'm just going to fill my diary with things that serve my hungers healthily and see what happens. So some things you can do in a minute, some things that take 10 minutes, some things that, you can do in a day. Like, we're sat here now, it's feeding our hungers. It might be a cold shower, it might be a run around the park, it might be going to the gym. It might be doing something with our children or whatever. But so you draw a list up of activities of all this and you start slotting them in the diary. And just mindfully putting 3 things in a day that is serving your hungers, it makes a massive difference. And the rest just, you kind of then trust in the process.
Removing the addictions.
So this was obviously after what happens is when you look at them, when anyone's coming into therapy, I always do the assessment. And they're always being served in an unhealthy way. If you had a spectrum and you said, right, stimulation, 10 positive, 10 negative. And then over the last 2 weeks, you wrote down everything that you were doing, like everything. So it's a full audit, from like how much conversations you have with family members, for example, friends, TV, all this different stuff. And it's up to the individual to assess it. So for someone else, I don't watch any TV, but the last month or so, I'm like, I want a bit of a distraction. So I've watched Landman. I've loved it. I probably won't watch anything else but so I've enjoyed doing that. Whereas if you're watching TV every night for 2 hours and that's like, what you do every night, then that might be differently when you really look at it. So having this assessment of how you're spending the time is critical. And then even just removing a few of those things and adding some of the things in off your new list can make a massive difference. And then the rest of it, you've just got to trust the process. You've got to hand it over. And you've just got to let, that's what you are in control of, the things that you're doing. So when we go back to that framework with the time, and we're saying like, again, commonly known, putting the things in that only you can do as the leader of the business and trying to farm everything else out. The other thing that goes in there are the 7 hungers activities. So what is in your diary on a daily basis that's serving you in a healthy way, that's nurturing you? Because that is the fundamental part that then drives everything. That's the foundation that's needed for growth when you're serving the roots. And
do you think what most people do is they cut the roots off by not doing that, and then the rest tends to rot almost?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example really quickly. I had a client who is successful, different in the care sector, a number of different care businesses, and it was health that had scared it. Later on in life, done a lot of good work, but just had this like can't let go of work and really struggling. And then health, usually what happens is it brings it to the surface, and then you go, shit, I need to do something about it, but you don't really know what to do. So the dynamic there, eldest daughter always had the responsibility, made early decisions that other people's needs were more important than hers. What career did she go into? Care. So that worked. So it made her successful. And we went through the hungers, and it starts out like this. Oh, I go for a walk every Friday. So the pen starts going up here, and then it's like, oh, but my younger sister comes with me. And it's like, oh, she's a bit of a drain. And then it's like, do you know what? For the full hour, all she does is fucking talk about herself and her problems. It's like -10. Yeah. So like, well, why just go on your own? It's like, well, that's not what we do. We'll try it. And one day she went, I'm just going to walk on my own today. She went on her own. And this sounds so simple, but it's usually in the simplicity where the things shift. And just that walk on her own that day, she chose it probably for the first time that she allowed herself. So she chose herself. She chose her own needs over somebody else's need. And that was a big shift. And that then knocked onto the businesses. It knocked onto the activity in the businesses. She loved reading stories. She hated the admin. She didn't even need to really be there because the business was doing really well, but still felt all this responsibility for the business. It all stemmed back from that. Other people's needs are more important than my own. So it ended up that, in that half day, it was the storytelling that was done, and then it gradually, those small bits, ended up, and it results in an exit and moving on and life changing. But we subconsciously just carry on doing the same things, and it's when the impasse comes up that it's because part of us wants something different, but the other part of us doesn't want to let go of it, and that's where the friction comes in. So the hungers framework is a really, really good tool to be able to go, right, well, what have I been doing over the last week? How am I spending the time? It directly correlates to the inputs and the outputs and the outcome, because it all links through, as does the beliefs that as to why you're doing the things that you're doing, the hungers that you're making. And just having that audit's important. And the key bit with it as well is it's never fixed. So whatever you're doing, for the next couple of weeks, if you carried on doing exactly the same things, you'd probably then start feeling some kind of dissatisfaction, because you've got to keep it changing and adapting.
That was a good way to frame that with the story. I want to finish up with some quick fire questions, if that's okay. So what do you think is the most dangerous belief successful business owners never question?
What's the most successful?
What's the most dangerous belief successful business owners never question?
The most dangerous belief is I'm at an impasse. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that's never questioned is like it's who am I doing it for? Like who am I behind the business? And I think a lot of successful people, we see two paths with it, but a lot of successful people do actually go down that path as well and find themselves.
At what point does ambition turn into self-sabotage?
At the point of perceived near success.
What do founders mistake for confidence as actually fear?
Confidence in relation to fear is when you're doing things at surface level, but deep down, you know in the body that it's for different reasons as to why you're doing it.
Why do some people make more money after losing everything?
Because in the words of the great Bob Dylan, when you ain't got nothing, you ain't got nothing to lose.
And last one. What questions should every business owner ask himself tonight but usually avoid?
If I allowed myself to do things differently, what would be the outcome?
I think that's a great point to finish up. You've got a book coming out as well soon, Paul?
I have. It's The Growth Equation is out on the 31st of March.
Okay. So once that is out, we'll add that into the show notes underneath the podcast. We'll put your social media notes below as well. Everyone got a ton of knowledge from Paul here today. So make sure you subscribe, share the show, and we'll see you next episode very soon.